Fantastic, Alan. Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership throughout this long process. So I have a lot of slides here. They'll be available to everybody. There are some that I'm going to just gloss over, essentially items that have not essentially not changed from UDS3, and really focus on some of the key points. This is a general overall guidance, and this is really, taken from the instructions for the A1 participant demographic form. So the form can be completed by an intake interviewer. That could be the person scheduling the visit. It could be the person who's testing them or the coordinator running the visit. It could be done in person. It could be done remotely. There are a few basic principles, though. We would like people to use the best source of information whenever you're allowed to do so. And so we'll talk about some questions that are very specific for the participant only versus general demographic information that may be more accurate from the study partner if the participant themselves are too impaired to recollect that information. There's a lot of flexibility. Collect the information when it best fits into your site plan visit schedule. It could be collected in advance. It could be collected remotely. It could be collected in person. What works for you? There is a coding guidebook, so always feel free to refer back to the coding guidebook, especially as we get started, to make sure that we're answering the questions appropriately. And make sure that you pay attention to any question-specific instructions. So very straightforward. The form really has three sections, one focused on demographics, and here we do want you to use the best source of information. Section 2 is 3 questions, the subjective memory complaint, and the participant only should answer. Those 3 questions are rephrased for the study partner in Form A2, and we'll take a look at that. So on Form A1, the participant needs to report their awareness of a memory problem or not. And then Section 3 is really ADRC staff coding. We'll take a look at this. There are a few pieces of information, though, that you're going to want to make sure you have on hand to fill out that Section 3, such as the patient's occupation and enrollment type, referral source, and a full address so that you can look up their ADI. So very important. So let's get into the form itself. All of the forms that we're going to look at today will start with a brief description of the data collection process. So here's where you're going to specify, was it English, Spanish, in person, or remote? And if it was remote, why did you choose remote or not? Nobody's going to get dinged for answering in one way or the other, but it's to help us understand how the data was collected. So the form itself begins with demographics, and there are a few changes in it. Month and year of birth, no change, but which country or region did you spend most of your childhood? And this is a 3-character code. So right on the form itself, it'll give the USA for United States, CAN for Canada, so on and so forth. But Appendix 1 of the form lists the countries across the globe where a participant may have come from. So you may need to look that up, and we recommend that you look that up. Don't hand the appendix to the patient and have them pick one anyway. This is really getting a general sense. If somebody says, well, I didn't really live in any one country, then you may have to live with an unknown. But if they say I spent the majority, and we're looking for a best, estimate of what was most influential in their child development years. So there may not be a right or a wrong. We're going with best response. Race and ethnicity form has expanded, and this is to keep in line with other NIH initiatives. So not just checking a box for Black or African American, but actually potentially specifying which race one comes from. Likewise for Hispanic, and note that there is additional forms for those coming from the Middle East as well as Asian communities. So please be aware of this. This isn't to tie you all up. It's to get a little bit more detailed information for us. The next set of questions go into gender identity and sexual orientation. These may be touchy issues for some individuals. I did want to point out that there is a prefer not to answer option. For all of these questions, we want to make sure that our participants feel comfortable. We'd like to encourage them to share what they're comfortable sharing. However, please familiarize yourself with the different gender identity and sexual orientation categories so that you can best answer questions. I think most of these are straightforward. The one that was a learning experience for me was Two-Spirit. And this is used for indigenous populations in America and should only be used in such populations. But not in other cultures where adopted out of context anyway. So I'd encourage you to familiarize yourself with these categories. Of course, we want to understand primary language, handedness, education, marital status. No surprises here. Living situation really is broken down into these three questions. So living situation basically tells us what the support system is potentially in the home. And the primary type of residence is really addressing something different. So there are some shared characteristics between these two questions, but they're actually kind of getting at both residency type as well as live-in support. And then, of course, the first 3 digits of the zip code to protect the anonymity of the patient. There are 2 veteran status questions. These are new in UDSv4, basically, again, fitting into NIH initiatives to better serve our veterans and collect important health information from them, looking at whether or not people have served in active duty and or if they obtain medical care or prescription drugs from a VA facility. There is a physical engagement exercise question, didn't seem to fit anywhere else, but it was felt to be an important data point given the amount of effort in the field that is devoted to investigating physical exercise and health related cognitive benefits. Basically asking folks how much time per week. Again, we're looking for the best source of information that we have. The second section of this, after describing the patient, is really these 3 subjective memory questions. And these were developed in conjunction with the cognitive working group, and they are validated questions. Again, all 3 of them, they may sound redundant at times, but very, very important. Do you feel like your memory is becoming worse? There's no time frame there. It's a general question. How often do you have trouble remembering things? And then the third question actually gives us a time frame compared to 10 years ago. So please work with your participants to make sure that they understand the differences between these 3 questions. Now, the final portion of the A1 form is really the form that you're going to fill in independently or after your interview with the patient. So to look up the area deprivation index, you need the full address in most cases. But you do not submit that with your NACC form, the full address. That is kept in confidence in your center. All that would be reported is the state-only decile and the ADI national percentile. The link to the ADI index is right on the form. I encourage you all, if you've not looked up a state only or decile or national percentile, to please familiarize yourself with this. The occupational index is modified from Hollingshead Occupation Index. The codes are included as an appendix that's part of the form. So you should make sure that you're asking the participant, when you're going through the other questions, what was their primary occupation throughout their working life. But again, don't hand the participant the coding sheet. You'll be able to look it up and hopefully identify by category. So please familiarize yourself with those appendices. A few brief comments on Form A2, co-participant demographics. Again, this form has been dramatically shortened, and it's really focused on the co-participant's relationship to the participant. I do note in the red box, there is a separate question on perceived reliability of the co-participant, given that so many of our forms are reliant on that reliability of the co-participant. But do not ask this question of the participant. This is your subjective impression. And then, of course, the subjective memory scale. So this is how the form looks like. What's the relationship? How long have they known the person? Do they live with them? How do they contact them? What's the frequency of contact? And how much time do they spend with each of those encounters on average? That final question, question 5, you shouldn't ask the co-participant, how reliable do you think you are? This really should be your subjective impression from interacting with the co-participant as to their reliability. And then the subjective memory complaint questions, again, the same 3 questions, just tense changed to indicate that we're talking about the participant's memory, not the study partner's memory, but the same 3 questions. So we'll get a real good view of what the participant thinks of their own memory and what the co-participant or study partner believes they're seeing as well. So that's really a recap of Forms A1 and A2. Please familiarize yourself with the terms, the appendices, and how to look up the Area Deprivation Index. Thanks, and I think we'll have time for questions later in the break, or if I've made it through in time, perhaps now.
We have about 1 minute if we want to read aloud any of the ones from the Q&A box. What age range would we consider childhood?
So we're really considering childhood the breadth of birth to age 18, but really what you want to capture is the spirit of the formative years. So it may be that somebody's childhood from birth to age 8 was in Cuba, and then they moved to the United States. Cuba may be the most appropriate answer. It may be that if they were born and only lived a year in Cuba and then immigrated to the United States, that listing the United States may be most appropriate. Again, this is a judgment. There are no hard and fast rules, and I'd be happy if any of the other members of the CTF would like to join in on that, but really we're looking for what the participant and or co-participant feel was that most influential childhood developmental geographic location.
Great, thanks, Greg.